The desert sun hung low in the Saudi Arabian sky, its golden light casting long shadows on the luxurious streets of Riyadh. Tyson Fury looked out at the horizon, and the bright shades of orange and gold reflected the storm of emotions within him. The gravity of the upcoming fight pressed down on his chest, intertwined with the tension that seemed to hover in the air around him. Despite the serene beauty of the city, Fury couldn't escape the feeling that this calm was a prelude to the storm. The faint hum of distant traffic mingled with the melodic calls to prayer coming from the minarets, creating a symphony unique to the city. The dry heat carried with it the scent of spices from the bustling bazaars, mingling with the faint odor of desert sand. It was a moment of serene beauty, but beneath the surface a tension simmered, unseen but palpable. Tyson Fury leaned back in the soft leather chair of his hotel room, looking out over the sprawling cityscape. It was cool inside, the air fragrant with the faint scent of incense from the burner in the corner. But his mind was far from calm. Fury's memories began to scroll like an old reel of film, flashing the moments that had shaped his destiny. Each frame carried the smell of sweat-soaked gymnasiums, the metallic tang of blood from smashed lips, the distant hum of approval or cheers from the crowd. The moments came alive as if by the static crackle of an old projector, vivid but tinged with the sepia of time. They weren't just memories, but battle scars, delineating a mosaic of triumph and despair on the canvas of his soul. He remembered the first time he stepped into the boxing ring as a skinny teenager, the cheers of his family mingling with the jeers of the crowd. His father's encouraging voice echoed in his ears. "You're Fury, son. You're unstoppable." He remembered a crushing defeat early in his career that made him doubt everything. But then he rose to his feet with renewed determination. Images of his darkest nights came to mind. Awake in silence, battling the demons of depression that whispered lies about his worthlessness. But intertwined with the pain were moments of triumph. The victorious raising of the gloves, the roar of the crowd embracing him, and the hugs of Paris and his children who told him they believed in him, no matter what. It was these moments that shaped him, made him who he was. A man forged in fire and relentless hope. The roar of the crowd, the sheen of sweat on his eyes, the crack of gloves against flesh, all of these were constants in his life. He thought of Paris, his wife and their children who were a light in his chaotic world. He thought about his battles in and out of the ring with depression, addiction and insecurity. He had risen from the ashes more times than he could count. He remembered those days vividly, the dark nights spent questioning his worth, the long hours spent in gyms under flickering fluorescent lights, the sound of his own heavy breathing as he pushed his body to the limit. The ring was his sanctuary and his battleground, the place where he had proven time and time again that he could defy the odds. And now, on the verge of a fight with Alexander Usik, heralded as the fight of the century, Fury felt an anxiety he couldn't shake. Not fear, never fear, but something darker, like a storm brewing over the horizon. A knock at the door brought him out of his reverie. A wave of tension surged through him, and his breath caught for a moment. His pulse quickened, and he straightened in his chair, clenching his fists instinctively. The room, once a cocoon of loneliness, was now filled with a sudden, unsettling energy, and the soft hum of the air conditioner enhanced the silence. Thoughts swirled around in his head, a never-ending cycle of past victories and the gravity of the upcoming fight. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the anxiety, and then the sound came again, sharper this time, cutting through the silence like a blade. It was light but purposeful. Fury's body tensed instinctively. He wasn't expecting anyone. His team had strict instructions. Interrupt no one. He crossed the room in a few steps, his massive figure moving with surprising grace. Through the peephole he saw a man in a strict suit, whose face was unfamiliar to him. "Mr. Fury," he said as the door ajar. His voice was smooth, polished. "I apologize for the intrusion. There is a matter that requires your immediate attention." Fury frowned. "Who sent you?" "A mutual acquaintance," the man replied with an inscrutable expression. He slipped a business card through the crack of the door. Fury glanced at it. The name was unrecognizable, but the emblem embossed on the business card, a falcon clutching a scimitar, was familiar. She was associated with the Saudi king, who had supported the fight from the beginning. Reluctantly, Fury stepped aside to let the man pass. The moment he did, two more figures emerged from the shadows of the corridor. Fury's instincts flared, but before he could react, something cold and metallic pressed against his spine. "Don't move," a voice whispered in his ear. A thought flashed through his mind. 3 against 1, perhaps there are more of them, and they're waiting outside. No doubt they had disarmed his guards. Fury's hands twitched, wanting to fight, but the cold logic of survival made him freeze. "What do you want?" he growled in a low voice. The man in the suit smirked. "Just your cooperation, Mr. Fury. That's all." They made him sit down, binding his wrists with zippers that dug into his skin. The one with the gun held him at gunpoint, while the others went through his things. Fury clenched his jaws as they tossed aside his family photos, his workout gear, his Bible. "You're wasting your time," he said. "Whatever you think I have, you're wrong. It's not about what you have," the leader said, his tone almost amused. "It's about getting the message across." Before Fury could continue, the man's cell phone rang. He stepped back to answer it and spoke in rapid Arabic. Fury strained to catch scraps of the conversation. The words "Usik" and "payment" stood out. When the man returned, his demeanor had changed. He looked agitated, his movements more abrupt. "There's been a change of plans," he told his accomplices. "We're moving him." They dragged Fury to his feet, and the slings dug into his wrists, leaving marks on his skin. His heart pounded in his chest, the metallic taste of adrenaline on his tongue. The corridor outside the room was dimly lit, and the faint smell of disinfectant and stale concrete lingered in the air. Fury stumbled when one of the men shoved him roughly, and the cold barrel of a gun pressed against his back, silently warning him to move on. Each step seemed like an eternity, escape scenarios running through his head, and the shadows in the hallway seemed to thicken around him. The hallway was empty and eerily quiet. They took him down the service elevator to an underground parking garage where a black SUV was waiting. Fury's thoughts were racing through his head. He needed to find a way out, but his hands were tied, his options limited. As he was shoved into the back seat, Fury went over his options in his mind. His pulse rumbled in his ears, and he assessed the cramped space around him. He felt the weight of his bound hands, the pressure of nearby bodies, and how cocky his attackers were, underestimating him. Determination flared in him. This was his moment. Timing was everything. Fury equalized his breathing, feeling his muscles tense, then took his step with explosive precision. He threw his weight to the side, crashing into the man beside him. The impact made the gun roll across the floor. There was chaos all around. Fury's fists, even bound, were like sledgehammers. He felt the satisfying crunch of bones as he stamped his head into the face of one of his attackers. The driver lunged for his weapon, but Fury fended off the blow with his foot, catching his wrist. The leader shouted an order, but it was too late. Fury's rage turned the tide. He managed to free his hands by using a shard of glass from a broken watch on his wrist. With a roar, he lunged at the leader, striking with his fists with precision and power, honed by decades. When the dust settled, the attackers lay on the ground and groaned. Fury's chest heaved, his knuckles bloody. He snatched the keys from the unconscious driver and sprinted out of the garage. He had to get to a safe place to warn his team. But even more than that, he had to get to the ring. The fight against Usik wasn't just for titles or money. He had to fulfill a promise he made to himself years ago, during the toughest period of his life. Fury recalled one night when he lay on his back in a darkened gym after a brutal sparring session. He stared up at the ceiling, the metallic tang of sweat and old leather in the air, and swore he would never let his demons win. This fight was the culmination of that vow, proof that he was more than his failures, and more than the man his critics doubted. This was his chance to write his legacy into the annals of boxing history. Not as a fighter who simply survived, but as someone who thrived against all odds. He had to redeem himself and prove that his journey, filled with battles in and out of the ring, had molded him into an indestructible being. This fight epitomized every moment when he doubted himself, every dark night when giving up seemed easier than fighting on. It was a chance to silence the critics and ghosts of his past, to show the world and himself that he could defeat anything, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. It was about legacy, about proving to the world and himself that he was indestructible. By the time Fury reached the hotel, his team was in a frenzy. Security swarmed, police were called, but Fury was focused on one thing: the fight. As he entered the arena the night of the fight, the events of the previous days weighed heavily on him. But as soon as the first gong sounded, it all faded away. In the ring, Fury was in his element. Every punch, every dodge, every movement was a testament to his resilience. His eyes stayed fixed on Usik, who was a formidable opponent. his speed and strategy evident in every jab and counter. The energy of the crowd grew with each exchange, their voices turning into a deafening roar that seemed to shake the arena. Fury could feel their excitement. Their belief in him fueled his determination. Punch after punch, round after round, the two champions pushed each other to the limit. Sweat trickled down Fury's face, covering his eyes. But he didn't waver. He was the Gypsy King, and he was relentless. In the final round, Fury saw his chance. A second mistake in Usyk's defense, and Fury's right hook hit the target. The sound of the punch echoed around the arena, followed by the crowd's applause. Usyk staggered, his knees buckled, and Fury came at him with a barrage of punches that left no doubt of his superiority. When the final gong sounded, the fatigue and pain vanished and Fury raised his arm victoriously. The crowd surged to its feet, their screams echoing around the arena. Fury stood to his full height, a smirk spreading across his battered face. He had faced bandits, adversity and doubt, but nothing could make the Gypsy King let up. Later, in the silence of his dressing room, Fury looked at his reflection. Staring back at him was the man who had survived, the warrior, the champion. And as he held his belt high, he knew one thing. No matter what the world threw at him, he would always rise. The applause from the arena still echoed faintly in his ears as he closed his eyes, savoring the sweet taste of triumph.